and welcome to Crowvane Manor. Wherever you are, and whatever kind of night it's been, you've come to the right place to slow down. Let the world go quiet for a while. Out here, none of it needs your attention. Many of you return to these rooms night after night, and I'm grateful for that. There's a reason you keep coming back. The stories kept inside these walls aren't quite like the ones you'll hear anywhere else. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. And if these stories stay with you, a like and a subscribe help more than you know. Now get comfortable, breathe slow, and let's open the door together. When I was in high school, my friends and I used to go on what we called valley rides. There was not much to do where we lived, especially late at night, so we would pile into someone's car and drive through the rural roads outside town. The area was made up of long valleys separated by wooded mountains and rolling hills. There were only a few houses once you got far enough out, almost no traffic and rarely any police. That isolation was part of the appeal. Someone would drive while the rest of us listened to music, talked, and passed around a few 40-ounce bottles. It was reckless, and I am not defending it now, but at the time, it was something we did often. We knew the roads well. The first valley stretched for miles before the road began climbing over the mountain into the next one. If we wanted a shorter ride, we could turn around before the climb. If we had more time, we would cross into the second valley and continue from there. Most nights were uneventful. We saw deer, farm equipment, and the occasional vehicle coming from the opposite direction. Sometimes we stopped at a lookout or pulled onto the shoulder to smoke and talk. Nothing about those roads normally felt mysterious. One night, several of us were driving toward the far end of the first valley. I do not remember exactly how many people were in the car, but there were enough of us that everyone could see different parts of the sky and road. It was dark, and we were approaching one of the larger hills near the mountain that separated the two valleys. As the car came over the top of the hill, a small orange light appeared above the mountain ahead. At first, it did not seem important. It was only a single light, about the size a distant aircraft light might appear from the ground. I assumed it was a plane, a tower beacon, or some kind of light on the mountain. Then it began moving in a strange way. It did not travel steadily from one side of the sky to the other. It curved and twisted. Before any of us could decide what it was, more lights appeared. At first, there were only a few. Then, there were dozens. Within perhaps 10 or 15 seconds, around 50 orange lights had appeared above the mountain. Every person in the car noticed them. They were not scattered randomly. They moved in a coordinated pattern. The closest comparison I can make is to two strands of DNA twisting around each other. The lights seemed to pair off, with one circling another as the two moved upward. Several of those paired strands formed a much larger corkscrew shape. The entire formation slowly twisted into the sky. It looked organized. The individual lights moved in and out around one another without colliding or breaking formation. Some seemed to pass behind others, then return to the front. The color remained a steady orange. I do not remember them flashing. There were no red or green navigation lights, and there was no obvious central aircraft or structure holding them together. For several seconds, everyone in the car stopped talking. We had been drinking, but none of us was so drunk that we could not understand what we were seeing. More importantly, all of us saw the same thing. One person might mistake stars, aircraft, or reflections for something strange. An entire car full of people watching dozens of lights move in the same complicated pattern is harder to dismiss that way. The driver slowed almost to a stop. Someone told him to turn toward the mountain. If the lights were coming from the ground, we wanted to see who was releasing them. If they were aircraft or something else in the sky, getting closer might give us a better angle. The road ahead curved toward the base of the mountain, where another road climbed toward the next valley. The driver accelerated and headed in that direction. We kept watching the formation through the windows. The lights continued twisting upward. From where we were, it seemed as though they were directly above or just beyond the mountain. We could not judge their distance or size. They might have been small objects close to the ridge or something much larger and farther away. The darkness removed almost every useful reference point. As we reached the bottom of the mountain, all the lights disappeared at once. They did not slowly fade. They did not drift behind clouds or descend beyond the ridge. 1 second, the entire orange formation was visible. The next, every light went out simultaneously. It looked as though someone had flipped a switch. The sky above the mountain became completely dark. We continued toward the road that climbed over it. Everyone began talking at once. Some thought the lights had been fireworks, although there had been no explosions or smoke. Others suggested flares. A few of us thought they might be lanterns. No explanation matched the pattern or the way every light vanished at exactly the same moment. We decided to keep going up the mountain. Even if the lights were gone, we wanted to see whether there were people, equipment, or vehicles near the top. Before the road began climbing seriously, we reached the final place where someone could turn off. A barricade stretched across the road ahead. It was a normal municipal road barrier, a long white and orange board resting on 2 supports. There were no police officers standing beside it, no construction vehicles, no warning signs explaining why the road was closed. Only the barricade. Half of us wanted to get out and move it. We were teenagers, curious and already excited by what we had seen. A lightweight barrier would not have been difficult to lift aside. The other half thought that was a terrible idea. Someone had placed it there for a reason. The road might have been damaged. There could have been construction equipment, fallen trees, or some dangerous situation ahead. The lights had already made the night feel wrong, and moving a barrier in the middle of nowhere seemed like the kind of decision that could turn curiosity into a serious problem. The driver made the final decision. He turned the car around. At the time, some of us were disappointed. We had come close enough to the mountain that we felt the answer might be just beyond the barricade. Looking back, I am glad we did not move it. If something official was happening on the mountain, driving into it while drinking would have been a very bad idea. We started heading back toward town. The lights did not return. The road through the valley remained dark and empty. We kept discussing what we had seen, trying to recreate the pattern with our hands. Someone compared it to a helix. Someone else described it as a giant corkscrew. We agreed that the individual lights had seemed to twist in pairs while the whole formation rotated upward. A short time later, we reached one of the more heavily traveled roads near town. It was still rural, but drivers sometimes used it as an alternate route to the next town instead of taking the interstate. A white Ford sedan passed us in the opposite direction. It looked like the kind of car police departments or government agencies sometimes used as an unmarked vehicle. There were no visible emergency lights, markings, or anything proving it belonged to law enforcement. By itself, it would not have seemed important. White sedans were common. A person could easily have been driving home from work. But because we had just seen strange lights and roadblock, we paid closer attention to it. A few miles later, another white Ford approached from the opposite direction. This time, a black Chevrolet Suburban or similar large SUV followed closely behind it. The SUV was completely dark, black paint, dark windows, no visible markings. It looked like a government vehicle, or at least the kind of vehicle movies teach people to associate with government agents. I admit that my judgment was influenced by the lights. On another night, I might have seen an ordinary sedan and a family SUV. There was no proof that either vehicle was connected to anything. Still, seeing them traveling toward the blocked mountain road added to the feeling that something unusual was happening behind us. We continued toward town. We expected the rest of the drive to be normal. Then, as we came down a hill overlooking the main street, we saw a car on fire. It was not smoking lightly from the engine. The vehicle was completely engulfed. Flames rose from the middle of the street, bright enough to illuminate the buildings and pavement nearby. From the top of the hill, we could see that the main road through town had been closed. Emergency vehicles may already have been near the fire, but from our position, the scene was difficult to understand. A burning car was serious, but cars catch fire for ordinary reasons. An accident, electrical fault, fuel leak, or deliberate act could all explain it. The strange part was that it happened on the same night as everything else. The driver turned toward a road that passed the baseball field and high school, which could take us around the blocked section of town. We had used that road many times. Before we got far, we encountered another barricade. It looked like the same kind we had seen at the bottom of the mountain. White and orange, set across the road. Again, there was no clear explanation visible from the car. We could not continue that way. The driver turned around. We headed back toward the main road, hoping to find another route through town. As we reached higher ground, fire engines began racing in from the next town. Their lights flashed across the road and nearby houses. The sirens were loud enough to hear from a distance. Several trucks appeared to be responding. That seemed like a large reaction for one vehicle fire, though a burning car near buildings or fuel could easily require multiple units. We did not know the full situation. Then, as we tried to find another way around the closed streets, we saw a house burning on the other side of town. Flames were coming from the structure. The car fire was not the only emergency. A house was on fire too. That explained why so many fire engines were arriving, but it made the night feel even stranger. Within a relatively short period, we had seen dozens of orange lights twisting above a mountain, found a blocked mountain road, passed vehicles that looked official, encountered another barricade in town, and then discovered two separate fires. Every route we tried seemed to be closed. We eventually had to leave the way we had entered, drive back toward the valley, climb to a small settlement on top of another mountain, and take a completely different highway around town. The detour added a lot of time to the drive. Everyone in the car was quieter than before. The night had begun as an ordinary valley ride. Now it felt as though we had stumbled into the edge of something we were not supposed to see. Once we finally returned to the parking lot where we usually gathered, we stopped and tried to make sense of everything. The first theory was falling space debris. Maybe an object had broken apart high in the atmosphere. The orange lights could have been pieces burning as they descended. If debris fell over the area, it might have started the car and house fires. Officials could have blocked roads while searching for wreckage. The white cars and black SUV might have been government vehicles responding to the event. That explanation connected almost every part of the night. The problem was the movement of the lights. Falling debris should travel downward or across the sky according to momentum and gravity. It might break into pieces, spread apart, or leave burning trails. It should not form pairs that twist around each other like DNA strands. It should not create a corkscrew formation, slowly rotating upward. The objects we saw appeared controlled, or at least organized by some force we did not understand. They also disappeared simultaneously, rather than burning out at different times. If they were fragments, some should have faded earlier than others. Another possibility was military flares. Aircraft can release flares during training exercises. From a distance, multiple flares can appear to form patterns as wind and perspective move them through the sky. Some military illumination systems descend under parachutes and remain visible for several minutes. If an exercise was taking place, roads might have been blocked and unmarked vehicles could have been involved. But the lights did not look like flares drifting downward. They moved upward in a twisting formation. We heard no aircraft. There were no flashes, explosions, or smoke trails. I also did not know of any military installation nearby that would normally conduct such an exercise over rural valleys and towns. Fireworks were another explanation. A large display could create dozens of orange lights. Certain fireworks spin, curve, or produce patterns in the sky. Perhaps we were farther away than we realized, and the sound did not reach us. Maybe an event was happening beyond the mountain. That could explain why the road was blocked. But fireworks usually appear suddenly, burst outward, and fade. These lights arrived one after another, joined the same pattern, and remained as separate points moving together. There was no explosion, no color change, no visible trails, no sound. Chinese lanterns became our best ordinary theory. People light small paper lanterns with flames inside and release them into the air. From a distance, they appear as steady orange lights. Dozens could be launched during a celebration, memorial, or festival. Wind currents near the mountain might have caused them to swirl. If several columns of air twisted together, the lanterns could appear to spiral. The roadblock might have been connected to the event. The lanterns could also disappear at roughly the same time if they passed behind the ridge or entered a cloud. That explanation fits the color and number of lights better than most others. But the formation still seemed too precise. The lights moved in pairs. The pairs twisted around one another. The larger structure formed a corkscrew. Wind can create complicated patterns, especially around mountains, but the movement looked more organized than random turbulence. They also did not drift slowly like lanterns. The entire display developed within seconds. Then every light vanished at once. If they had passed behind the mountain, we should have seen them descend toward the ridge rather than rise above it. If they entered cloud cover, we should have seen clouds, but the sky appeared clear. We also considered that the fires and vehicles might have been unrelated. That may be the most likely answer. Unusual events sometimes happen close together by coincidence. The lights could have been lanterns or flares from a private event. The barricade on the mountain may have been placed there for construction or road damage. The white cars and black SUV could have belonged to ordinary drivers. The car and house fires could have had separate causes. Once we saw the lights, we became more alert and connected every unusual detail. Psychologically, that makes sense. When something strange happens, the mind begins searching for a pattern. An unmarked-looking car becomes a government agent. A road closure becomes evidence of a cover-up. Two fires become falling debris. Things that would seem ordinary on another night start feeling connected. We were teenagers, drinking and already excited. Our judgment was not perfect. The pattern we remembered in the sky may have been less precise than it seemed. Maybe the orange lights were much farther apart. Perhaps some disappeared before the others. But our attention made it feel simultaneous. The twisting could have been caused by the movement of the car, changes in perspective, or clouds moving across them. I accept all those possibilities. There were enough of us, however, that the sighting was not private. Everyone saw the lights. We stopped because of them. We all watched the formation. We all saw them go out. The exact pattern may be difficult to describe, but no one thought it looked normal. I have sometimes wondered whether the mountain itself blocked the lights rather than them turning off. As we drove closer, our angle changed. The formation may have moved behind the ridge at the same moment we reached the base. From our perspective, every light would disappear together as the land blocked them. That would create the effect of a switch being turned off. If the lights were farther away than they appeared, the mountain could have hidden them all at once. This is a strong possibility. It would mean the lights were not directly above the mountain, but somewhere beyond it. The corkscrew movement could then have been a group of lanterns, aircraft, or flares seen from a misleading angle. The roadblock might have been entirely unrelated. But if they moved behind the mountain, why did they appear to rise? Perspective can be deceptive at night. Without visible distance, upward movement may actually be horizontal or downward movement along a different plane. The lights might have followed a natural path while our minds interpreted it incorrectly. I wish we had stayed still longer. Stopping the car would have allowed us to compare the lights with fixed points. Instead, the driver began moving toward them almost immediately. The changing position of the car may have contributed to the strange appearance. We also had no cameras ready. This was the late high school period before everyone constantly recorded everything. Even if someone had a phone with a camera, it probably would not have captured distant orange lights clearly at night. There was no physical evidence afterward. No news report that I remember connected strange aerial lights to the fires. We never learned why the mountain road was blocked. We did not find out whether the car and house fires had related causes. The entire night remained a collection of events without an official explanation. Years later, I still think about the barricades. The first one prevented us from climbing toward the lights. The second kept us from using the normal route around the burning car. Both were simple municipal barriers, not permanent gates or police roadblocks. Anyone could have moved them. That made them feel temporary, as though they had been placed quickly. But road departments use those barriers constantly. Construction, fallen trees, damaged pavement, fires, and utility work can all require sudden closures. There is nothing mysterious about seeing two on the same night if multiple emergencies were happening. The official-looking vehicles also may have been coincidence. White Ford sedans were common among police departments, but they were also common family cars. Black Suburbans were used by government agencies, but they were also driven by ordinary people. We saw them in darkness while already frightened. The lack of visible markings allowed imagination to fill in the rest. Still, all of them were traveling toward the mountain we had just left. That direction kept them tied to the lights in my memory. Maybe emergency officials had received reports of the same aerial display. Maybe the road closure required inspectors or police. Perhaps the vehicles were responding to the fires rather than the lights. Their route could have taken them through the valley toward town. There are normal possibilities. I cannot determine which one is true. The fires remain the most concrete part of the night. We definitely saw a car burning on the main street. We definitely saw a house on fire elsewhere in town. Fire engines arrived from another community. Roads were closed. Something serious was happening. The question is whether those emergencies had anything to do with what appeared above the mountain. If debris or an aircraft accident caused them, there should have been reports, wreckage, or a larger response. We heard nothing about that. Two unrelated fires in the same small town on one night are unusual, but not impossible. The car fire might have spread from an accident or mechanical problem. The house fire could have begun from faulty wiring, a furnace, cooking, or any number of ordinary causes. Fire departments often handle multiple incidents close together. The timing may have meant nothing. What keeps the memory alive is the way the night seemed to build. The first orange light appeared, then dozens joined it. They twisted together above the mountain. We drove toward them. They vanished. A barricade stopped us. Unmarked-looking vehicles passed in the opposite direction. A car burned in town. Another barricade blocked our route. Fire engines raced in. A house was burning on the other side. Every new event made the earlier one feel more significant. By the time we returned to the parking lot, the night no longer felt like a collection of coincidence. It felt like one event unfolding around us. That feeling does not prove the events were connected. Human beings are naturally drawn to stories with a beginning, middle, and end. We dislike randomness. The lights became the beginning. The roadblocks and vehicles became evidence. The fires became the result. It created a complete explanation, even when we had no facts supporting it. Perhaps that is all that happened. Our minds built a story from unrelated pieces. But the lights still need an explanation of their own. I have seen aircraft, stars, satellites, fireworks, lanterns, and flares. None moved exactly like that formation. The closest visual comparison remains twisting DNA strands arranged inside a rising corkscrew. The movement was smooth. The lights appeared to pass around one another. There were too many to track individually, but the overall pattern was clear enough that several of us described it in similar ways. Then they vanished. I do not claim they were alien spacecraft. We saw only lights. There was no solid object, sound, or interaction with us. Calling them extraterrestrial would add information that was never present. I also do not claim there was a government cover-up. The vehicles may not have belonged to the government at all. The barricades may have been routine. The fires may have been accidents. There is no proof of anything beyond what we observed. It was simply the strangest combination of events I have experienced in one night. Sometimes I wonder what we would have found if we moved the first barricade. Maybe there would have been construction equipment and a perfectly ordinary road closure. Perhaps a group of people had released lanterns from a field or hilltop. Seeing them would have solved the mystery immediately. Or maybe we would have reached another barrier, police vehicle, or area we were not meant to enter. The uncertainty is partly our own fault. We turned around. At the time, it was the safer choice. We had been drinking, and the driver did not want trouble. Moving a barricade could have damaged the car, led to an arrest, or put us on an unsafe road. Curiosity was not worth the risk. Still, every mystery becomes larger when you stop just before reaching the answer. The mountain remained behind us. The lights were gone. By the time we returned, whatever had happened would have ended. I have considered searching old local newspapers for reports of the fires or road closures. If I could identify the exact date, I might learn whether the car and house fires were connected. There may have been a festival, military exercise, or memorial release of lanterns that explains the lights. Unfortunately, I no longer remember the date clearly enough. It was one valley ride among many during high school. The sequence stayed with me, but the calendar details faded. Without a date, town name, or official report, the event is difficult to research. Maybe someone else in the area saw the lights. There were few houses in the valley, but people in the next town or on nearby roads may have noticed them. If dozens of orange objects crossed the sky, we should not have been the only witnesses. Perhaps reports existed and disappeared into local conversation. Maybe everyone else identified them easily and never considered the sighting important. We were the ones who happened to connect them with the rest of the night. Years later, I still return to the lantern explanation because it is the least extraordinary. A large group could have released dozens during a celebration. Wind patterns over the mountain could create spirals and pairs. The ridge could hide them simultaneously when our angle changed. The road might have been closed for the event. The vehicles could have belonged to organizers or local officials. The fires could have been unrelated emergencies. That explanation requires no alien craft, secret operation, or falling debris. It only requires unusual wind, perspective, and coincidence. It is probably close to the truth. But whenever I picture the formation, I struggle to believe wind created it. The lights did not appear chaotic. They moved with a precision that looked intentional. The pairs twisted at similar speeds. The larger corkscrew rose as one structure. If lanterns were carried by the same air current, they might form clusters or spirals, but would they repeatedly weave in and out around one another? Perhaps they would. Atmospheric movement around mountains can be complicated. I am not an expert. I only know what it looked like from the car. The event did not turn me into someone who believes every strange light is a UFO. Most unexplained things are ordinary phenomena seen under bad conditions. Distance, darkness, movement, and alcohol all affected us. We lacked enough information to judge size, altitude, or speed. Any confident conclusion would be dishonest, but I also cannot dismiss it as nothing. 7 or 8 teenagers saw dozens of orange lights appear above a mountain. They formed a twisting pattern none of us recognized. They vanished together. The road toward them was blocked. The rest of the night was filled with road closures, official-looking vehicles, and fires. Maybe every piece had its own ordinary explanation. Maybe we witnessed an event that was never made public. Maybe the lights were only lanterns and the rest was coincidence. I do not know. What I remember most clearly is the moment we first came over the hill. There was one small orange light above the mountain. Then another appeared. Then another. Within seconds, the sky was filled with them. They wound around one another in pairs, building a glowing corkscrew in the darkness. Someone told the driver to go toward it. We turned. The lights continued moving. Then we reached the bottom of the mountain, and every one of them went out. The barricade waited just beyond the last turnoff. We never learned what was on the other side. When I was a child, I lived in a house that backed up close to a wooded area. My bedroom was small and had only one window. It was positioned in the center of the far wall, directly across from the entrance to the room. The way the house had been built made the view from that window unusual. My bedroom sat in a recessed section between 2 rooms that extended farther out from the house. The bathroom was on the left side, and my parents' bedroom was on the right. From inside my room, looking through the window, I could see the outside walls of those 2 rooms jutting forward on either side. It created a narrow outdoor space directly beneath my window. Someone standing there would be surrounded by the house on 3 sides. They could move behind the bathroom wall in one direction or disappear behind my parents' room in the other. Beyond that part of the house was the yard, and not far away was the beginning of the woods. During the day, there was nothing especially frightening about the view. I had looked out that window countless times. At night, however, the recessed area became extremely dark. Light from inside my bedroom reflected against the glass, making it difficult to see clearly outside. The walls of the bathroom and my parents' room blocked some of the light coming from the rest of the property. Anything standing close to the house could remain almost completely hidden. One evening, I had just finished taking a shower. I left the bathroom wrapped in a towel and walked into my bedroom to get dressed. I was not expecting anything unusual. I was probably thinking about finding clothes, drying my hair, or whatever else I normally did before bed. As I entered the room, I looked toward the window. Something large was moving outside. I did not see it for long. I caught the shape only as it moved slowly across the window and disappeared behind the outside wall of my parents' bedroom. It was already leaving my view by the time I noticed it. I could not clearly identify what it was. There were no visible facial features, clothing, or colors. It was simply a large, dark shape passing close to the house. Its movement seemed slow and deliberate. It did not dart past like a small animal. It did not move quickly enough to seem like a bird or something falling from a tree. It appeared tall and broad, although the darkness and limited view made judging its exact size difficult. For a moment, I stood completely still. I stared at the section of the window where the shape had vanished. I expected it to return. Maybe it would lean back into view. Perhaps it would continue around the outside of my parents' room and appear near another window. Nothing happened. The recessed space outside my bedroom looked empty again. I began trying to explain what I had seen. It could have been one of my parents walking past outside. Maybe an animal had wandered close to the house. A deer could look surprisingly large at night. A person's shadow might have been cast across the window by a passing car or outdoor light. The movement could even have come from inside the room, reflected against the glass. But the shape had not looked like a reflection. It seemed to have depth. It appeared to occupy the space outside my window, moving behind the actual wall of my parents' room. I became frightened. I was still wrapped in a towel and felt especially vulnerable. The idea that someone or something might be walking directly outside my bedroom was enough to make me leave the room. I went to find my father. I told him that I had seen a large shape moving outside my window. I explained which direction it went and where it had disappeared. My father did not immediately dismiss me. He went outside to check. That helped at first. An adult was taking the possibility seriously enough to search the property. If there had been a trespasser, animal, or anything else near the house, I expected him to find evidence. My father walked around the outside walls. He checked beneath my window and looked behind my parents' bedroom, where the shape had gone. He also searched near the beginning of the woods. I stayed inside while he looked. Every minute he remained outside made me more nervous. I imagined him finding someone hiding against the wall. I worried the person might run deeper into the woods. I also wondered whether the shape was watching him from somewhere he could not see. Eventually, my father came back. He had found nothing. There was no person near the house. No animal ran away. He did not find footprints, broken branches, or any sign that something large had passed beneath my window. As far as he could tell, the yard and the edge of the woods were empty. His search should have made me feel better. It did not. If I had seen a person, where had they gone? There had not been much time between the moment I noticed the shape and the moment my father went outside. Someone could have run into the woods, but I had seen it moving slowly. There was no reason to think it had become frightened or hurried until I left the room. Maybe it heard me tell my father. If the window was open or the walls were thin enough, a person standing close to the house might have heard our voices. They could have escaped before my father came outside. That possibility was frightening, but believable. The woods offered plenty of places to hide. Even in daylight, someone could disappear among the trees quickly. At night, finding them would be almost impossible. My father may have told me it was probably an animal or a shadow. I do not remember his exact words. I only remember that nothing was found and that the event was left without an explanation. I eventually returned to my room. I had to get dressed and go to sleep there, even though the window no longer felt safe. I probably closed the curtains or blinds, if there were any. I may have avoided looking directly at the glass for the rest of the night. I expected another shape to pass. Nothing did. At some point, I fell asleep. The following morning, I woke early for school. It was still dark outside. An orange streetlight near our house cast a dim glow across the yard and onto my bedroom window. The glass was covered with morning dew. That was normal. Moisture often formed on the outside of the windows during cool nights. The streetlight made the droplets visible, turning the glass into a dull orange surface. Then I saw the handprint. It was on the window. A single large hand had been pressed into the dew. The print was clearly defined. I could see the palm and each finger. It was much larger than my own hand. The fingers were long, and their ends seemed to narrow almost to points. It did not look like a normal child's hand. It did not even look completely like an adult hand. The proportions seemed wrong. The fingers stretched farther than I expected, and the pointed ends made the shape appear almost claw-like. I stared at it from inside the room. The print was positioned on the glass as though someone had stood outside during the night and placed one hand directly against my window. The shape I had seen the evening before immediately came back to me. It had moved past the same window. Now there was physical evidence that something had been close enough to touch the glass. I felt terrified. The handprint meant the previous sighting had not only been a distant shadow. Whatever made it had stood within inches of where I slept. Only the window separated us. I did not know when the hand had been placed there. It could have happened before I noticed the shape. Maybe the figure had been standing at the window for some time, watching me before moving away. It might have returned after my father finished searching. Perhaps it waited near the woods until the house became quiet, then came back. That idea frightened me more than the original sighting. My father had walked around outside and found nothing. If a person had been hiding nearby, they had watched him search. They knew we were aware of something near the house, yet they still returned and pressed a hand against my bedroom window. I went to tell my parents. I wanted them to come immediately, before the print disappeared. But they did not believe me. They may have thought I was continuing the story from the previous night. From their perspective, I had become frightened by a shadow, slept badly, and then interpreted a mark in the condensation as a hand. Children can scare themselves easily, especially after one strange event. I tried to explain that the print was clear. I told them how large the hand looked and how long the fingers were. By the time I got one of them to look, the print was gone. I do not remember exactly why. The morning may have become warmer, causing the dew to evaporate. Sunlight could have reached the glass. The moisture may have shifted or dried as the inside of the house heated up. Someone might have wiped the window without realizing what had been there. All I remember is that when I needed to prove the handprint existed, it was no longer visible. That made me look like I had invented it. There was no photograph. At that age, I did not have a phone or camera ready beside the bed. I had seen something frightening and immediately gone to find an adult. By the time anyone else checked, the only evidence had vanished. My parents treated the incident as imagination. Maybe they believed I had seen the outline of my own hand. I could have touched the inside of the window earlier, leaving oil on the glass. When condensation formed, the old print might have appeared. That is a normal phenomenon. Fingerprints and palm marks can become visible when a window fogs or collects moisture. If I had pressed my hand against the glass days earlier, the oils could remain even after the window looked clean. The following morning, the dew would form differently around those marks. That might explain why a hand appeared. But the print looked much larger than mine. The fingers also seemed too long. Perhaps the moisture distorted the shape. Droplets could have spread, making each finger appear extended or pointed. The orange streetlight and my fear may have changed what I thought I saw. After seeing the dark shape the previous night, I was prepared to interpret any mark as evidence of a creature. That is possible. The handprint may have belonged to my father. During his search, he might have placed his hand on the window while looking inside or checking the area. If he touched the outside glass, his print could appear in the dew the next morning. An adult hand would be much larger than mine. The angle or smearing might make the fingers look unusually long. I do not remember asking whether he touched the window. At the time, I was convinced the print belonged to the figure. That explanation is probably the most reasonable. My father had been outside near my bedroom. He could have leaned against the glass, looked for tracks below it, or steadied himself while searching the dark area. He may not have remembered doing it. The shape I saw and the handprint could therefore have separate, ordinary explanations. A shadow or animal moved outside. My father later left the print during his search. My mind connected the two because they happened close together. But I remember the print as being on a part of the glass that would have been difficult for someone to touch casually. It appeared high and centered enough to suggest a person facing the window. The palm looked broad, the fingers extended upward. It did not seem like a smudge from someone reaching around the frame. I also wonder whether the moisture was on the inside rather than outside. If the handprint appeared within the condensation inside my room, then someone in the house could have created it easily. I was a child, and I may not have understood which side of the glass held the dew. The temperature difference between the warm room and cool morning could cause condensation indoors. A family member might have touched the window at some earlier time. The print could have remained invisible until that morning. Again, that would explain it without anything being outside. But at the time, I believe the hand had been pressed from the other side. The shape seemed to face me correctly, although handprints can look similar from either direction. Memory may have simplified that detail over time. There are also animals capable of leaving strange prints on glass. A raccoon has long fingers that can look almost human. If a large raccoon climbed onto a ledge beneath the window, it might place one paw against the glass. Its toes could appear thin and pointed. The dark shape I saw could have been the animal moving around the side of the house. Raccoons are mostly active at night and can move quietly. From inside a lit room, a raccoon close to the window might cast a much larger silhouette. That is a strong natural explanation. But I remember the shape as much larger than a raccoon. It moved high across the window rather than low along the ground. The handprint also appeared human-sized, not like a small paw. A bear could leave a much larger mark, though its paw would have a different shape and would probably include claws. Depending on where we lived, a bear near the woods might not have been impossible. A bear standing partly upright near the house could look enormous. Its movement behind my parents' room might appear slow. The print of a front paw in condensation could have long marks from the claws. However, my father likely would have found tracks, disturbed soil, or other evidence if a bear came that close. He found nothing. The shape may have been a person. A trespasser could have walked behind the house, heard me react, and hidden in the woods. After my father stopped searching, they might have returned and touched the window. The long fingers may have looked pointed because of smearing in the dew. This explanation follows the normal rules of the world, but it is more frightening than an animal. Someone standing outside a child's bedroom after dark would have had no innocent reason to remain hidden. If they came back after the search, they wanted us to know they could return. Perhaps the print was left deliberately. But why only one hand? Why not knock, look inside, or leave clearer evidence? Maybe they placed a palm against the window while trying to see through the glass. If the curtains were open, they could have watched me sleep. That thought stayed with me for a long time. I began feeling uncomfortable near the window. At night, I avoided standing directly in front of it. I may have kept the curtains closed more often. Sometimes I imagined another hand slowly appearing against the glass. Other times, I expected the large shape to pass again. Nothing similar happened. At least nothing I remember. There were no repeated handprints. No one knocked on the window. My father did not find a trespasser in the woods. The event remained isolated. That supports the possibility of coincidence. One shadow, one ordinary handprint, a frightened child connecting them. But isolated events can also be the most difficult to explain because there is no pattern to investigate. If the shape had returned, we might have set up lights or watched the yard. If more prints appeared, someone could have photographed or measured them. Instead, the only evidence vanished with the morning dew. Years later, I still think about the timing. I saw the shape before telling anyone. My father searched and found nothing. The following morning, the print appeared on the same window. I did not know about old fingerprints becoming visible in condensation at that age. I did not expect to find a hand. The sight surprised me. Maybe that surprise made the print seem stranger than it was. The pointed fingers are the detail I question most now. Human fingertips are rounded. A clear handprint should show rounded ends unless the person had unusually long nails. The fact that I remember them narrowing to points suggests distortion. The moisture may have run downward or spread along streaks on the glass. The orange light could have created shadows around the edges. My frightened mind may have transformed long, ordinary fingers into claws. That would be a natural way for memory to exaggerate the threat. Yet the image remains clear. One large palm. 5 thin fingers, each ending almost in a point. It looked less like someone had accidentally touched the window and more like something had placed its hand there to show me it had been real. I wish my parents had seen it. Even if they identified it immediately as my father's print or an animal track, I would finally have an answer. Instead, their disbelief became part of the fear. I knew what I had seen, but I could not prove it. The disappearance of the print made the entire story belong only to me. Children often experience that problem. They see something for a few seconds, tell an adult, and by the time the adult looks, it is gone. The child is then expected to accept that nothing happened. Sometimes that is correct. Children misinterpret shadows, reflections, and ordinary noises. But being dismissed does not erase the original experience. I remember standing in my small room after the shower. I remember the towel around me and the feeling of being exposed. I remember glancing toward the window and seeing a large shape moving slowly out of sight behind my parents' bedroom. I remember my father going outside and searching the edge of the woods. I remember the empty yard. Then, I remember waking in the dark before school. The orange streetlight shone through the dew. The handprint was waiting on the glass. Maybe my father left it. Maybe an old print reappeared because of condensation. Maybe an animal climbed close to the window. Maybe the shape had been a deer, raccoon, bear, or trespasser. Each explanation solves part of the story. None completely explains the way the two events fit together in my memory. The shape moved past the window. The hand appeared there hours later. It was as though whatever I saw had returned after my father stopped looking. Perhaps it stood outside while I slept. Maybe it placed one hand against the glass and looked into the room. The print disappeared with the dew, but the image never left me. Even now, when I see condensation on a dark window, I check it for marks. Most of the time, there's nothing. Occasionally, a smear or old fingerprint becomes visible, and I remind myself how easily glass can preserve a touch. That may be all I saw that morning, a harmless mark made frightening by the night before. I would like to believe that, but I still picture the shape disappearing behind my parents' room. It was too large. It moved too slowly. And when my father searched, there was nothing there. The next morning, one long-fingered hand had been pressed against my window. By the time anyone else came to look, it was gone. I used to live on the 5th floor of an apartment building where the walls and windows did very little to block outside noise. The building was not especially modern, and sound traveled easily through it. I could hear neighbors moving furniture, doors closing in the hallway, and cars pulling up outside. Whenever we ordered food while watching television, I often heard the delivery driver before anyone rang the bell. I could hear the car arriving and parking near the building, even from 5 floors above the street. Because of that, I knew how sound normally carried around the apartment. I knew the difference between something happening inside the building and something happening outside. I also had a rough idea of how far away a voice or vehicle was, based on how clearly I could hear it. That is part of why this experience has always bothered me. One night, I woke suddenly to the sound of a scream. It was the middle of the night, although I do not remember the exact time. The apartment was completely quiet, and the darkness outside made it difficult to tell whether it was closer to midnight or early morning. At first, I did not move. I remained in bed and listened. The scream had sounded like a woman, but it happened so quickly that I was not sure. It could have been part of a dream, a television from another apartment, or an animal somewhere outside. Sometimes foxes and cats can make noises that sound disturbingly human. A car's tires can also produce a sharp sound that resembles a scream when someone brakes suddenly. I waited for around 30 seconds. Nothing else happened. The building remained quiet. I began to relax and was about to lie back down when I heard another scream. This one was clearer. It was a woman shouting for help. I sat upright. The voice seemed to be coming from somewhere outside the building. It did not sound like a television or a neighbor speaking through a wall. There was a distance to it, but it was loud enough to reach my room clearly. Someone sounded frightened. I got out of bed and went to the window. From the 5th floor, I could see a large part of the street and the area around the apartment building. There were other buildings, parked cars, patches of pavement, and whatever streetlights were nearby. I looked down, expecting to see someone running, a car stopped in the road, or people gathering around a disturbance. There was nobody. The street appeared empty. No doors were open. No vehicles were moving. I did not see anyone standing near the entrance to the building or walking between the parked cars. For a few moments, I stayed by the window and searched the darker areas. The woman could have been behind another building, in an alley, or somewhere blocked from my view. Sound can travel strangely between apartment blocks. A voice from another street may seem as if it is coming from directly below. I listened carefully, but heard nothing else. Eventually, I turned away. I told myself it might have been someone shouting during an argument in another apartment. Perhaps the window had been open for only a moment, allowing the sound to escape, before being shut again. Maybe someone had been drunk or playing around. I started walking back toward my bed. Then the woman screamed again. This time, the voice sounded louder. Closer, I stopped immediately. It seemed as if whoever was calling had moved toward my building while I was standing at the window. I rushed back and opened it. Cold night air entered the room. I leaned forward and looked down again. There was still nobody visible. I did not want to shout too loudly at first because I was not completely certain what was happening. Waking an entire building because I had imagined something would have been embarrassing. Quietly, I called out, "Hello?" There was no answer. I waited. The street below remained motionless. I could hear the distant sounds that exist in almost every city at night. Maybe an engine far away, wind moving between buildings, or the low hum of electricity and traffic. But there was no woman, no crying, no footsteps. I stood at the open window for what felt like a very long time. It may have been only a minute or two, but the silence stretched. I began wondering whether I had heard anything real. I had woken suddenly from sleep. Perhaps I was still partly dreaming. People can experience sounds while falling asleep or waking. These hallucinations can seem completely real, especially when they involve a voice calling a name or a sudden loud noise. Maybe I had heard the first scream in a dream and then expected to hear it again. My own fear could have turned ordinary sounds into a woman shouting. The longer I waited without hearing anything, the more possible that explanation seemed. I closed the window and started to step away. Then the scream came again. It was sudden and clear enough that I no longer cared whether I woke anyone. I opened the window wider and shouted, "Hello? How can I help?" My voice echoed slightly between the buildings. No one responded. I kept looking down toward the street. I checked the pavement near the entrance. I looked between cars and toward the darker ends of the road. Nothing moved. I stood there for almost a full minute. Then, the woman answered. "Help, he is getting me." The words were clear. There was no mistaking them for an animal or a car. A woman was asking for help and saying that a man was getting her. Her voice sounded terrified. I reacted without thinking. I left the apartment and ran down the stairs. I do not remember whether I put on proper clothes or shoes. I may have thrown something on quickly, or I may already have been wearing enough to go outside. I only remember the urgency. Taking the stairs from the 5th floor felt endless. I expected to hear more screams while I was descending. The concrete stairwell amplified my footsteps. Each landing looked empty. No one else opened their door to ask what was happening. That seemed strange, but I was focused on reaching the street. If the woman was being attacked, every second mattered. I reached the ground floor, opened the main entrance, and stepped outside. The street was empty. I called out for her. I walked a short distance from the door and looked in both directions. There were no people nearby. No woman ran toward me. No man was dragging someone into a car or doorway. I did not hear crying, movement, or another plea for help. The quiet felt unnatural after the urgency of the voice. I called again. My voice carried down the street, but nothing answered. I tried to locate where the screams might have come from based on how they sounded from my window. That was difficult from ground level. Buildings changed the way sound traveled, and the entire area looked different without the high view from my apartment. I checked the spaces between parked cars. I looked toward the entrances of nearby buildings. I listened for footsteps or a struggle behind walls. There was nothing. Then, a window opened somewhere above me. A man leaned out and shouted that I should shut the fuck up. He sounded angry because I had woken him. I called back that I had heard a woman screaming for help. He said he had not heard anything. That response made me doubt myself again. If the screams had been loud enough to wake me on the 5th floor, someone else should have heard them too. The woman's voice had sounded close, especially the final time. A neighbor with an open window or bedroom facing the same street should have heard something. But this man had only heard me shouting. He had not heard the woman. I remained outside for a while longer. I wanted to make sure she had not moved to another area or become too frightened to answer. I called a few more times, more quietly now. Nothing happened. No other windows opened. No one came outside. There was no sign of an emergency. Eventually, I returned to the building. The walk back up the stairs felt very different from the run down. Adrenaline had begun wearing off, and uncertainty replaced it. Had I responded too late? Maybe the woman had been pulled into a car while I was descending. A vehicle could have left before I reached the street. But I had not heard an engine accelerating away. I had not seen headlights from the window. Perhaps she had been inside another apartment. If someone was attacking her behind a closed door, I would not have seen anything from the street. Her screams might have escaped through an open window and then stopped because the window was shut or she was moved away from it. That possibility was frightening because there was no way to know which apartment the sound came from. There were too many windows and buildings. I did not have enough information to call a specific address. Maybe I should have contacted the police immediately. At the time, I was unsure whether I had heard something real. I had no visible victim, no suspect, and no exact location. I feared that calling emergency services and saying I heard a voice somewhere outside would not be taken seriously. I also worried that I was experiencing some kind of half-awake hallucination. So I returned to my apartment. The room looked exactly as I had left it. The bed was unmade. The window was open, or partly open. Nothing inside explained the screams. I sat awake for a long time. I listened for another cry. None came. Every small sound from outside made me tense. A car door closing caused me to return to the window. A distant voice made me hold my breath. But the woman never called again. Eventually, I lay down, although I do not think I slept much. For the next several days, I remained disturbed by what happened. I replayed the voice in my head. Help, he is getting me. It had not sounded vague. It had not been only a scream that I interpreted as words. I remembered the sentence clearly. The direct response also mattered. I had shouted, asking how I could help. After a period of silence, the woman answered. That made the experience feel like communication rather than a random noise. She seemed to hear me. I began checking local police information and news reports. For the next several weeks, I looked for anything unusual that had happened near the building that night. I expected to find a report of an assault, abduction, domestic disturbance, or missing woman. There was nothing. No crime matched what I heard. No neighbor mentioned police arriving during the night. There were no reports of a woman being attacked on the street. The lack of evidence left me with two possibilities. Either something terrible happened without ever being reported, or the screams had not existed outside my own mind. The first possibility is completely realistic. Many crimes go unreported. A woman attacked by someone she knew might not call the police afterward. She could have escaped, been silenced, or been taken somewhere else. The incident might have happened inside a private residence and never appeared in public records. Police records available to ordinary people are not always complete. An emergency call may be classified in a way that makes it difficult to find. It is possible that I heard a real person and never learned what happened. That thought brings guilt. Maybe I should have called the police immediately instead of going outside alone. If the woman was in danger, trained officers would have been more useful than one confused person shouting in the street. I might also have placed myself in danger by running downstairs. If a violent man was outside, I had no idea what weapon he carried or whether he would attack a witness. I reacted because I believed someone needed help, but I had no plan. The other possibility is that the entire experience happened in my head. I had no history of sleepwalking. I had never experienced vivid waking dreams before, and I have not experienced them since. But a person does not need a history of hallucinations to have one isolated event. Hypnopompic hallucinations occur when someone wakes and remains partly in a dream state. They can involve voices, music, footsteps, or even full visual figures. The first scream may have come from a dream. After waking, my brain could have continued producing the sound. Because I expected another scream, ordinary noises from outside may have been interpreted as one. When I shouted through the window, my own mind might have created a response. That explanation is disturbing in a different way. The words sounded external. They came from a specific direction. I believed I was interacting with another person. If my brain created all of that, then for several minutes I could not distinguish imagination from reality. Still, sleep-related hallucinations are known to feel real. They can occur while someone is able to move, sit up, and look around. The fact that I walked to the window does not prove I was fully awake. I may have remained in a confused state longer than I realized. The apartment's poor sound insulation could have contributed. A television in another unit may have been playing a violent scene. A woman on television could have screamed for help. Because the walls were thin, the sound might have traveled through a vent, window, or structural gap and seemed to come from outside. When I opened my window, the source could have become harder to locate. The program may have paused between lines, creating the delays I remember. Someone watching a movie could have lowered the volume or turned it off after I began shouting. That would explain why no one outside responded and why the neighbor heard only me. But the final sentence seemed to answer my question. Hello? How can I help? Then help. He is getting me. A film or television dialogue matching my words at exactly the right moment would be an unlikely coincidence. Not impossible, but unlikely. A recording from someone's phone or computer could produce similar timing. Perhaps the sound came from a video being replayed nearby. A person may have been watching something with headphones partly unplugged. The volume could have increased and decreased as they moved around. In an apartment building, sound can travel through strange routes. What seems like a voice from the street may come from a room several floors away. Maybe the woman was real, but not in danger. Someone could have been playing a game, watching a horror film, or joking with friends. The words may have been part of an argument or performance. When I called from the window, she might not have heard me at all. The timing of her reply could have been coincidence. That explanation would fit the lack of police reports. But the fear in her voice sounded genuine. I cannot prove that, of course. Actors can sound convincing. A person playing around can scream realistically. My own state of mind may have added urgency to the sound. There is also the possibility that the screams came from an animal. Certain animals can sound almost exactly like women. Foxes are especially known for cries that resemble human screams. Cats fighting or mating can also produce disturbing noises. The first sounds might have come from an animal hidden between buildings. When I shouted, the animal could have called again. But no animal can clearly say, "Help, he is getting me." Unless I transformed a series of cries into words, that explanation fails. The brain sometimes finds language in meaningless sound. Just as people see faces in random patterns, they can hear words in noise. A fox's cry combined with echoes might have sounded like a sentence because I was already expecting a woman. That is possible. Yet I remember individual words. I remember the pause between help and he is getting me. It did not sound like an animal. I also considered whether someone was deliberately trying to lure me outside. A person could hide near the building and imitate a woman in distress. When someone came down to help, they could rob or attack them. This is a common fear in urban legends, although real cases are probably less frequent than people imagine. If that was the plan, it worked. I ran downstairs alone and stepped into the street. But nobody approached me. No one tried to enter the building while the door was open. I did not see movement near the cars. Perhaps whoever made the sound lost interest or became frightened when I shouted. Maybe the angry neighbor opening his window scared them away. If it was a trap, I was fortunate. The fact that the voice became louder and nearer before I opened the window also fits someone moving toward the building. But I saw nothing from above. A person could have remained beneath an overhang, close to the wall, or in a blind spot, directly below my window. From the 5th floor, there were areas I could not see. They might have heard me looking and remained hidden. When I went downstairs, they could have moved away. There are too many possibilities and not enough evidence. What bothers me most is the silence between the screams. Each time, I waited long enough to begin doubting myself. Then, the woman called again. It felt as though something was testing whether I was still listening. The final reply was the clearest. It came after I directly asked how I could help. No answer for a full minute. Then, the sentence. If a real person heard me, why did she wait so long? Maybe the man attacking her prevented her from speaking. Perhaps she had to wait until he moved away. Maybe she was hiding and afraid my shouting would reveal her location. Or perhaps the delay existed because my half-awake mind was constructing the experience slowly. The neighbor's reaction also remains important. He was close enough to hear me shouting from the street. If he had been awake before that, he should have heard the screams too. But he said he heard nothing. Maybe his windows were closed. Perhaps his bedroom faced another direction. He may have been sleeping deeply and woke only after I started calling repeatedly. A scream from farther away might not have been loud enough to wake him. My voice directly beneath the building was different. His lack of awareness does not prove there was no woman. Still, it left me completely alone in the experience. No lights came on in other apartments. No one else leaned out to ask what was happening. No person came downstairs to help search. For something that sounded so urgent to me, the rest of the neighborhood remained strangely undisturbed. I returned to normal life, but sleeping became difficult for several days. I would wake and listen. Sometimes I thought I heard the beginning of another scream in the distance. It always turned out to be a car, neighbor, or ordinary city noise. I checked the window often. The empty street looked different after that night. Every parked car could hide someone. Every dark doorway seemed like a place a person might be pulled into without anyone noticing. Eventually, the fear faded. Nothing similar happened again. I never heard the woman on another night. There were no more voices answering me from outside. I never experienced sleepwalking or another waking dream. That single incident stands alone. The fact that it never repeated supports the idea of a rare sleep-related hallucination. It could also mean a real event happened once and ended before I found its source. I have never been able to choose between those explanations. If it was a dream, it was unlike any dream I had before or afterward. I moved normally. I opened and closed the window. I ran down 5 flights of stairs. I spoke with a neighbor. Those parts were real. The only uncertain element was the woman's voice. Everything I did in response happened while awake. Perhaps I woke from a nightmare, carried the voice into consciousness for a few minutes, and then fully awakened only after going outside. That sounds possible in theory. It does not match how aware I remember feeling. I knew where I was. I understood the time of night. I considered whether I was imagining the screams. I made decisions based on what I heard. The self-doubt was already present during the experience, which makes it feel less like a dream. I was testing reality. I looked outside. I waited. I called out. The voice answered. Still, the brain can create extremely convincing experiences. I do not want to claim a crime occurred without evidence. No victim was found. No report appeared. No one else confirmed the screams. The responsible conclusion is that I do not know what happened. I may have heard a real woman somewhere among the buildings. The acoustics could have carried her voice from farther away than I realized. By the time I reached the street, the danger may have moved elsewhere. She might have escaped or been taken inside. The police records I checked may not have included the incident, or I may have experienced one vivid auditory hallucination during the transition from sleep. Both possibilities disturbed me. One means someone was in danger and I could not find her. The other means my mind created a terrified woman so convincingly that I ran into the street searching for her. Sometimes I think about the exact wording. Help, he is getting me. It sounded almost like she was describing something happening in that moment, not something that had already happened. She did not say where she was. She did not give a building number or name. She only communicated danger. Maybe she expected me to see her from the window. Perhaps she could see my apartment light or hear my voice, but was hidden from my angle. If so, she may have believed help was finally coming. I ran downstairs, and no one was there. That is the part that leaves me uneasy. I responded quickly. The stairs took only a few minutes. A person could disappear in that time, but the street offered few signs that anything had happened. No dropped belongings, no open door, no car racing away. Only darkness and the angry man at his window. Years later, I can still hear the voice in my memory. The first scream woke me. The second made me get up. The third brought me to the window. Then I asked how I could help. After that long pause, she answered. Maybe the sentence was produced by my own brain. Maybe it came from a television or another apartment. Maybe it traveled from a street I could not see. Or maybe a woman was close to my building, hidden in the darkness, while someone pulled her away. I checked the police records for weeks and found nothing. No report ever explained it. The rest of the city seemed to move on as though the night had been completely ordinary. I did too, eventually, but I have never forgotten standing outside below my apartment, calling for a woman who had sounded only seconds away. No one answered me. No one else admitted hearing her. And after saying that he was getting her, she never screamed again. Forgive me for stepping in for just a moment. If you've only recently found your way here, then welcome. I'm glad you came. If these stories are keeping you company tonight, consider subscribing to Crowvane Manor. New stories arrive here often, the kind that stay with you long after the night is over. And if you tap the bell, you won't have to go looking. The next one will find you on its own. Thank you for being here. Now, let's return to where we left off. When I was in 7th grade, I thought about my father almost constantly. He had died 2 years earlier in a drunk driving accident. My cousin also died in the crash, and 2 of my father's friends were involved in what happened. The circumstances left behind a lot of grief, anger, and questions that I was still too young to understand properly. Losing a parent is difficult at any age, but as a child, death can feel especially confusing. One day, someone is part of your normal life. You know their voice, the clothes they wear, and the way they move through the house. Then, suddenly, everyone tells you that person is gone forever. Your mind understands the words, but part of you continues waiting. You imagine hearing their car outside. You think you see them in a crowd. You wake from a dream and briefly forget that they are dead. I missed my father deeply, and during 7th grade, those feelings became especially strong. I spent a lot of time remembering him and replaying pieces of my childhood in my head. One night, I could not sleep. Everything in the house seemed normal. My mother and siblings were there, and nothing strange had happened earlier that day. I lay in bed for a while, but my mind would not settle. Eventually, I began drawing. Drawing gave me something quiet to focus on when I could not sleep. I had a book or sketch pad with me and was sitting in my room, working under the light. The house around me was silent. Then I heard footsteps. They were coming down the hallway toward my bedroom. At first, I assumed it was my mother. I did not want her to know I was still awake, so I quickly tossed the drawing book onto the floor. I lay down and pretended to be asleep. The footsteps stopped outside my room. Then the doorknob began to shake. I kept my eyes partly closed and tried to make my breathing sound slow and normal. The door opened. My father walked into the room. One of his friends came in with him. That friend had also died years earlier. He had taken his own life in December 2001 when I was around 3 years old. Both men standing in my bedroom were dead. The moment I saw them, I felt as if my entire body stopped working. I wanted to move. I wanted to cry out. I wanted to run toward my father and hold him, but I could not. It felt as though an invisible distance separated us, even though he was only a few feet away. I sat there with my mouth open, staring. I remember feeling shocked enough to cry, but for a moment, even the tears would not come. There are times when fear or emotion becomes so intense that the body freezes. You know what you want to do, but your muscles do not respond. That was how it felt. My father looked exactly as I remembered him. He was wearing clothes I had seen him wear while he was alive. They were not glowing robes or anything symbolic. They were ordinary clothes associated with real memories of him. That detail made the experience feel more real. If I had seen an unfamiliar figure or a dramatic image of an angel, I might have thought I was dreaming. Instead, I saw my dad. The same body, the same face, the same clothing. His friend also looked like himself. Neither of them appeared injured. There was no blood, damage, or sign of the deaths that had taken them. They seemed whole. My father looked directly at me. At first, his face showed no emotion. It was a blank stare. That frightened me, because I could not tell whether he knew who I was. I had spent 2 years wishing I could see him again, but now that he was standing there, I did not know what the expression meant. Was he angry? Was he confused? Was I seeing only an empty copy of the person I loved? I tried to get closer, but I could not. Whether I was physically unable to move or simply frozen by shock, I do not know. I remained where I was, staring at the 2 dead men in my room. My father's friend walked toward the bed. He sat down on one side. I felt the mattress react to his weight. Then, my father sat on the other side. I was between them, or close to the middle, surrounded by people who should not have been able to enter the room. The bed seemed real beneath us. Their bodies occupied space. They were not transparent. They did not float. For a few moments, nobody spoke. I looked at my father, trying to understand what was happening. Then he said softly, in the voice I remembered, "I miss you." Those words broke through the shock. I had spent so much time missing him that I never considered the possibility that he might miss me, too. I wanted to answer. I wanted to tell him that I loved him and had thought about him every day. I wanted to ask where he had been, whether he was all right, and why he had come with his friend. But the words would not come. I could only look at him. His friend stood and walked out of the bedroom. As he entered the hallway, the space outside changed. The hallway began glowing with an intense white light. It did not look like the normal ceiling light or daylight from a window. The brightness filled the entire space, removing the familiar walls and doors. The hallway seemed to lead somewhere else. My father's friend continued into it. Then he disappeared. The light did not frighten me in the same way the figures had at first. It was strange and overwhelming, but it did not feel threatening. It looked almost like a doorway had opened between my bedroom and another place. My father remained with me for a moment longer. Then he stood. He walked toward the glowing hallway. Before leaving, he turned back and looked at me. This time, he smiled. That smile changed everything. The blank expression was gone. He looked like my father again, not an empty figure. It felt as though he wanted me to understand that he was all right. Then, he walked into the white light. The scene looked almost like something from a movie, but while it happened, it felt completely real. My father moved farther into the glowing hallway until the light surrounded him. I began crying harder than I ever had before. For a brief moment, I had him back. Then I was losing him again. I jumped from the bed and ran after him. The door seemed to close as he entered the light. I reached it and pulled it open. The glowing hallway was gone. Everything had returned to normal. The bathroom was where it had always been. My sister's room was on the other side. The ordinary hallway light and familiar walls were there. There was no white glow. My father was gone. His friend was gone. The house was quiet. I stood in the doorway crying. The experience was not frightening in the way most ghost stories are frightening. There was no threat. Neither man tried to harm me. My father did not warn me of danger or ask me to follow. He only told me that he missed me, smiled, and left. But the event was emotionally overwhelming. It felt like grief had opened the door and allowed me to see him one more time. Then the door closed, and I was alone again. I do not clearly remember what happened immediately afterward. I may have returned to bed. I may have cried until I fell asleep. Perhaps I told someone the next morning. What remains strongest is the encounter itself. The footsteps, the shaking doorknob, my father and his friend entering, the feeling that I could not move, their weight on the bed, my father's voice, the glowing hallway. And the moment I opened the door to find the normal house waiting on the other side. As I grew older, I considered whether the experience had been a dream. That is the simplest explanation. I had been thinking about my father constantly. I was unable to sleep and may have drifted off while drawing. The sound of footsteps and the doorknob could have been part of a vivid dream. My grief supplied the image of my father. My knowledge of his deceased friend placed him there too. The glowing hallway may have come from movies, religious imagery, or stories about the afterlife. Then I woke while running toward the door and believed I had physically opened it. Dreams can be incredibly detailed. A person can feel the weight of someone sitting on a bed, hear a familiar voice, and experience strong emotions while asleep. The fact that I remember the experience as continuous does not prove I was awake. Dreams often feel completely logical until they end. I may also have experienced sleep paralysis or a related hallucination. Sleep paralysis occurs when the mind wakes before the body fully leaves the sleep state. People can see figures enter the room. They hear footsteps, doors, voices, or breathing. They may feel unable to move while the figures approach the bed. The experience can be so realistic that the person remains convinced someone was physically present. My inability to move fits that explanation. I may have fallen asleep while drawing, awakened partially, and hallucinated my father and his friend. The figures sat on the bed because hallucinations often interact with the sleeping environment. Then, as my body regained movement, the scene transformed into the bright hallway and ended. That is a plausible explanation. But the experience did not feel like a typical nightmare. I was not being chased. There was no monster or violent event. The details were connected to my real grief. My father spoke directly to the one emotion I carried most strongly. I miss you. Maybe my mind created exactly what I needed to hear. I had spent 2 years believing that all the missing existed on my side. He was gone, and I was left behind. The dream allowed me to imagine that our connection continued in both directions. I missed him. He missed me. That thought may have been necessary for me to begin healing. His friend's presence is harder to interpret. The man had died years before my father. Perhaps my mind placed him there because I knew they had been connected in life. Maybe he had come to guide my father through the hallway. In the experience, he left first, almost as if showing the way. He entered the white light and disappeared. My father followed after saying goodbye. If I view the event as a dream, the friend acted like an escort. If I view it as a visitation, perhaps that was exactly what he was. I do not want to claim certainty about the afterlife. I cannot prove that my father entered the room. No one else saw him. There was no photograph or physical object left behind. The drawing book on the floor may have been there because I dropped it while awake, or because I knocked it down during sleep. I never checked the bed for an impression where the two men sat. Even if there had been one, blankets naturally crease and shift. The event exists only in my memory. Still, it has remained more vivid than ordinary dreams. Most dreams fade within hours. Specific faces blur. Words disappear. The sequence becomes difficult to reconstruct. This memory stayed. I remember my father's clothing. I remember the tone of his voice. I remember the blank expression changing into a smile. I remember the hallway becoming impossibly bright. I remember opening the door after him and seeing the bathroom and my sister's room exactly where they belonged. That final change affected me deeply. It was like standing at the border between two realities. With the door closed, my father was walking into a white place that did not belong inside our house. When I opened it again, the ordinary world had returned. There was no sign that another place had ever been there. Maybe that moment represented waking. The glowing hallway was the dream. The normal hallway was reality. My hand opening the door could have been the action that brought me fully awake. That interpretation makes sense. But it also felt like a door had genuinely closed between us. I sometimes wonder why my father's face was blank at first. If the purpose was only comfort, why did he not smile immediately? Perhaps my memory of him had become emotionally distant after 2 years. I could remember his appearance, but grief had frozen him into a still image. The blank face may have represented death, the part of him I could no longer reach. Then, before leaving, he smiled, restoring the living version of my father. Maybe my mind was replacing the memory of the accident with something gentler. Instead of imagining his final moments in an unsurvivable crash, I could remember him whole, sitting on my bed. Instead of thinking of him disappearing violently, I could picture him walking calmly into light. Instead of silence, I had his voice saying he missed me. Many people report dreaming of loved ones after death. Some describe those dreams as different from ordinary ones. The deceased person often appears healthy, speaks briefly, and leaves the dreamer with a feeling of peace or closure. Some call them visitation dreams. Psychologists may describe them as part of the grieving process. Both explanations can exist without canceling the emotional value. Even if my own mind created the experience, it created something meaningful. It gave me a conversation I could never have in real life. But part of me believes my father came to see me. The experience happened when I had been thinking about him constantly. Perhaps that grief somehow opened me to him. Maybe He knew I was struggling and wanted me to understand that the relationship had not ended completely. He did not tell me how he died. He did not explain where he was. He gave me only the words that mattered. I miss you. Then he smiled. That was enough. I have wondered whether the friend appeared because he had died earlier and was there to bring my father back. The friend walked into the glowing hallway first. He did not say anything to me. His role seemed different. He sat on the bed briefly, then led the way out. Maybe my father was not meant to remain long and needed someone to guide him. Or perhaps my mind remembered that both men were dead and grouped them together. There may be no deeper meaning. The experience also forced me to confront the fact that seeing my father again would not remove the pain. For those few moments, I had what I thought I wanted. He was in my room. He was close enough to touch, but I could not fully reach him. Then he left, and I cried as though he had died a second time. Grief is like that. You believe one more conversation would fix everything, but another goodbye would still be a goodbye. The encounter gave me comfort, but it also reminded me that I could not keep him. He belonged on the other side of the glowing hallway, whatever that represented. I had to remain in the ordinary house with the bathroom, my sister's room, my mother, and the rest of my life. There was no doorway I could follow him through. I think that may be why he smiled before leaving. He did not look afraid. He did not ask me to come. He wanted me to see him go peacefully. When I opened the door and found the normal hallway, it felt as though I had been returned to where I needed to be. I was still a child. My life was continuing, even though his had ended. I never had the same experience again. I dreamed about many things over the years, but I never saw my father enter my room in that exact way. There were no more glowing hallways. He did not return with another message. The single visit felt complete. That also contributes to my belief that it may have been a goodbye. If it was only the result of constant grief, I might have expected similar dreams to repeat. But the mind does not always work that way. One powerful dream can resolve part of an emotional conflict and never return. Maybe hearing those words allowed my brain to move forward. I do not remember the exact face my father made during every moment. I do not remember what his friend wore. Some details have faded, but the center of the memory remains unchanged. I was in 7th grade, awake late at night and drawing because I could not sleep. I heard someone walking toward my room. The doorknob moved. My father and his dead friend entered. They sat beside me. My father told me he missed me. His friend walked into a hallway filled with white light and disappeared. My father followed. Before he left, he turned back and smiled. I ran after him. When I opened the door, the light was gone and the house was normal. Some people would say, I dreamed it. They may be right. The human mind can create extraordinary experiences when grief and sleep overlap. Others might believe my father truly visited me. I cannot prove that either. I only know it did not feel like a meaningless nightmare. It felt personal. It felt like my father knew exactly what I needed. For 2 years, I had carried the image of him being taken from me by a violent accident. That night gave me another final image. He was not injured. He was not trapped. He was dressed the way I remembered him. He sat beside me and spoke in his own voice. Then he walked into a bright place without fear. I still cried harder than I ever had before, but beneath the pain, there was something else. For a few moments, my father had been near me again, whether he came from somewhere beyond death or from the deepest part of my own grieving mind. I heard him say the words I had always wanted to believe. He missed me too. My bedroom was in the basement, which meant the window sat almost level with the ground outside. From inside the room, the window was positioned just above my bed. I had pushed the bed against the wall beside it, so whenever I wanted, I could sit up and look directly outside. During the day, the view was not very interesting. All I could really see was part of the yard, the ground near the foundation, and anything that happened to pass close to the house. Because the window was so low, animals sometimes moved directly in front of it. At night, however, the window felt different. Anything standing outside would be at almost the same height as my face while I was lying in bed. There was no second floor distance or safe view from above. If something approached the glass, it would be close enough that only a thin pane separated it from me. That was one reason I usually kept the blinds closed after dark. The room felt safer when I could not see outside. One night, I woke suddenly to the sound of my cat screaming. It was not a normal meow. It was the kind of noise cats make when they feel cornered or threatened. She was hissing, growling, and letting out a sharp, panicked scream. The sound pulled me out of sleep instantly. For a moment, I did not understand where she was. Then I realized she was behind the blinds, pressed close to the basement window. I could hear her claws moving and the blinds shifting as she reacted to something on the other side of the glass. Waking to that sound was terrifying. Cats sometimes become excited over insects, birds, or other animals, but this reaction was extreme. She did not sound curious. She sounded frightened and aggressive at the same time, as if something outside had come close enough to make her believe she needed to defend herself. I sat up with a jolt. The blinds were still closed, so I could not see my cat or whatever she was reacting to. All I could hear was the hissing and screaming directly beside my bed. My first thought was that a stray cat had come near the window. Animals passed through the yard occasionally, and a neighborhood cat could easily have wandered close to the foundation. If two cats see each other through glass, they may hiss, growl, and become territorial. That explanation made sense. But the way my cat reacted made me feel that something was wrong. I did not stop to think carefully. I reached for the blinds and pulled them open as fast as I could. There was something directly outside the window. Its face was almost pressed against the glass. I froze. The creature was close enough that I could see details immediately. It did not look like anything I recognized. The best way I can describe it is as a mixture of an ugly cat, an owl, and a raccoon. Its face seemed partly feline, but the proportions were wrong. There was something round and flat about it that reminded me of an owl, especially around the eyes. Other parts of its face looked like a raccoon, but distorted and much larger. It was hideous, not only unusual or unattractive. It was the ugliest, most frightening animal I had ever seen. The creature was much larger than my cat. From what I could judge through the window, it seemed nearly twice her size. Because it was so close to the glass, it may have appeared larger than it really was, but even allowing for that, it did not look like an ordinary house cat. Its head filled a large part of the window. The eyes were wide and fixed on the room. Its fur looked rough and uneven, although the darkness made the exact color difficult to identify. There may have been lighter markings around the face, which could be why it reminded me of a raccoon or owl. Its ears did not look completely like a cat's ears. They may have been flattened back or hidden in the fur. Everything about the face seemed assembled incorrectly. The features were familiar individually, but together they created something I had never seen. My cat was still behind the blinds, close to the glass. She continued hissing at the creature. That detail made the sighting feel real. I had not simply awakened and imagined a face in the darkness. My cat had been reacting before I opened the blinds. Whatever I saw was in the exact place she had been staring and screaming at. For a moment, the creature did not move. It remained directly outside the window, looking in. I could not tell whether it was staring at me or at the cat. Its face was so close that I felt as if it had been waiting for the blinds to open. I wanted to move away, but my body would not respond. Fear seemed to lock every muscle. I could not shout. I could not close the blinds. I could only stare. The room was dark, except for whatever weak light came from outside. The basement window framed the creature's face like a picture. Because the glass was nearly at ground level, I could not see much of its body. That made it even more disturbing. There was no clear shape to help me identify it. Only the face. A large, unnatural face inches from mine. I do not know how long we looked at each other. It may have been only a second or two. In my memory, the moment lasted much longer. Then the creature suddenly turned and ran away. It moved out of view quickly. My cat remained tense, watching the direction it had gone. I stayed sitting in bed, unable to process what I had seen. The yard outside looked empty again. I did not open the window. I did not go outside to investigate. I probably closed the blinds as soon as I could move. I do not remember whether I called for anyone that night. Maybe I was too frightened to leave the room. Perhaps I convinced myself that if I remained still and kept the window covered, the creature would not return. For the rest of the night, every sound outside made me nervous. I listened for scratching against the glass. I imagined the face returning and pushing close to the window again. The basement no longer felt private. Before that night, I had thought of the blinds as a way to block the darkness. Afterward, I realized something could stand outside while I slept, hidden only because the blinds were closed. My cat had noticed it. If she had not screamed, I might never have woken. The creature could have remained at the window for much longer. That thought bothered me more than the few seconds when I actually saw it. How long had it been there before my cat reacted? Had it approached quietly? Was it watching the room through a gap in the blinds? Maybe it had seen me sleeping. The next morning, I told my mother. I described the creature as carefully as I could. I explained that it looked like a combination of a cat, owl, and raccoon. I told her how large it was and how close it had been to the glass. She dismissed it as a stray cat. That was the obvious explanation. A strange cat could have wandered into the yard and approached the window after noticing my pet inside. Some cats are much larger than others. A badly injured or diseased stray can look frightening, especially at night. Matted fur, scars, missing ears, or an unusual face shape could make an ordinary animal appear almost unrecognizable. My cat's reaction would also make sense if another cat was outside. Cats are territorial. Seeing a stranger inches away through glass could easily cause screaming, hissing, and aggressive behavior. I understood why my mother thought that was what happened, but I did not believe the face belonged to a normal cat. If it was a cat, it was the ugliest and most disturbing cat I had ever seen. The eyes seemed too round. The face looked too broad. Its size did not feel right. There was something about the way the features fit together that did not match any cat I knew. As I grew older, I began considering other animals. A raccoon is one of the most likely possibilities. Raccoons often move around at night, approach houses, and investigate windows. They can be much larger than domestic cats. Their faces have dark markings around the eyes, which might have looked strange through the glass. If a raccoon pressed close to the window, the shape of its face could appear distorted. Its rounded ears, pointed snout, and mask-like markings might create the exact mix of cat, owl, and raccoon that I remember. My cat would certainly react strongly to one. A raccoon standing close to the window could also seem much larger because of perspective. That explanation fits many details. But I had seen raccoons before. At least, I believe I knew what they looked like. The creature did not register in my mind as a normal raccoon. The face seemed flatter and more unnatural. Its eyes looked different. Then again, fear can change perception. I had awakened suddenly in darkness. My cat was screaming. I pulled the blinds open without knowing what to expect. My brain had only a fraction of a second to identify an unfamiliar animal inches from my face. Under those conditions, a raccoon could look monstrous. An owl is another possibility, although less likely. Large owls sometimes land near windows or on the ground while hunting. Their faces can look almost human when seen directly from the front. The wide eyes and circular facial feathers can be deeply unsettling, especially at night. An owl close to the glass might appear much larger than expected. My cat may have reacted because the bird was a predator or because its sudden presence startled her. But I remember the creature having a body shape more like a mammal. I also remember it running away rather than flying. It moved quickly across the ground and out of view. Unless the darkness hid the movement of its wings, it probably was not an owl. It could have been an opossum. Opossums have pale faces, long snouts, dark eyes, and rough fur. They can look extremely strange when surprised. A large one might be nearly twice the size of a cat. Their bare ears and unusual facial features could make them resemble a mix of several animals. If one pressed its face near the window, I might remember the snout and eyes as something unnatural. A sick or injured opossum could appear even worse. They are also common around homes at night. That may be the most ordinary explanation after a raccoon. The creature may even have been something more familiar seen at a bad angle. A large feral cat with damaged ears and matted fur might look nothing like a healthy pet. Cats with severe infections can have swollen faces, cloudy eyes, missing patches of fur, and open wounds. The darkness might have hidden some features while exaggerating others. If the animal had been pressed close to the window, the glass could have distorted its face. Some basement windows are made from thicker or uneven glass, especially in older houses. Looking through it at an angle can stretch or flatten whatever is outside. The creature may have seemed broad and owl-like because the window itself distorted its appearance. The combination of poor lighting, fear, and glass could turn an ordinary stray into the monster I remember. I also wonder whether I was fully awake. Waking suddenly can cause visual hallucinations. During the transition between sleep and consciousness, dream images may briefly appear in the real room. People can see figures, faces, animals, or shadows that vanish once the brain becomes fully alert. Perhaps my cat's screaming woke me during a dream. I opened the blinds and saw a real animal, but my half-asleep mind layered a nightmare image over it. The creature might have been an ordinary cat or raccoon transformed by a momentary hallucination. That explanation would account for why the face seemed so impossible while still allowing my cat's reaction to be real. My cat was reacting to an actual animal. My brain changed what that animal looked like. This is the explanation I find most believable now. I may have awakened so frightened that my mind exaggerated or altered what I saw. The face remains clear because the moment produced intense fear. Emotional memories often feel sharper than ordinary ones, even when some details are inaccurate. The more I replayed it, the stranger the creature may have become. Over time, the cat-like features, owl-like eyes, and raccoon-like face could have blended into one fixed image. Memory does not preserve events perfectly. Each time we remember something, we reconstruct it. Details can become stronger, weaker, or more dramatic. Still, the memory does not feel blurry. I can picture the creature as clearly now as I could that night. I remember how close it was. I remember the shape of its face against the glass. I remember the exact feeling of my body becoming cold and motionless. I remember its eyes. Even if the image changed over time, the fear has not. One detail I often return to is my cat's position behind the blinds. She had placed herself directly between me and the creature. She may have been defending the room. Cats are small, but they can become extremely aggressive when they believe their territory is threatened. Her screaming woke me before the animal could do anything else. Perhaps she saw a normal predator or rival. Maybe the creature had attempted to paw at the glass. I do not remember hearing scratching, but her reaction suggested more than simple curiosity. It is also possible that she had trapped herself behind the blinds and become frightened when the animal approached. The enclosed space might have intensified her panic. She could not easily retreat into the room without moving the blinds, and the creature was inches away on the other side. When I opened them, I may have surprised both animals. That would explain why the creature ran. It was not waiting for me. It was focused on my cat until I suddenly appeared. The window itself protected us. Whatever the animal was, it could not enter through the glass. But fear does not always care about physical barriers. The creature was so close that the room felt invaded. Its face occupied the place where the outside world should have been. I had gone to sleep believing the blinds separated me from darkness. I woke to discover something had come all the way to them. After that night, I stopped opening the blinds after dark. Even when I knew the yard was empty, I could not bring myself to look. The possibility of another face waiting on the other side was too strong. During the day, opening them was fine. Sunlight made the outside world visible. At night, the glass became a black mirror. I could see reflections from inside the room, but very little beyond them. Anything outside could watch me without being seen. That thought stayed with me. Sometimes my cat would approach the window at night and look between the blinds. If her ears moved or her tail became tense, I would immediately become nervous. I never wanted to check what she was watching. It could have been an insect, mouse, or another cat. I preferred not knowing. The memory also changed how I felt about basement bedrooms. Being near ground level means animals can approach the window naturally. There is no fence, balcony, or height keeping them away. A raccoon, opossum, stray cat, skunk, or fox can walk directly up to the glass. From the animal's perspective, the window may look like an opening or reflective surface. It might see its own reflection or smell a pet inside. There is nothing mysterious about animals investigating homes, but knowing that does not erase the image. The creature I saw seemed wrong in a way ordinary explanations cannot completely remove. Maybe I saw a rare animal. Some species look very different when sick, wet, or injured. Mange can remove fur and change the shape of a face. An animal with mange might have large exposed ears, sunken eyes, and an oddly shaped body. A raccoon or fox suffering from disease could look almost unrecognizable. If its skin was visible through missing fur, the face might appear pale or deformed. The creature could have been twice the size of my cat and still belong to a known species. Wildlife experts might have identified it immediately. I had only a few seconds. I was not thinking scientifically. I was thinking that something ugly and impossible was staring through my window. The speed of its escape also supports a normal animal. Once the blinds opened and I moved suddenly, it ran. It did not remain to threaten me. It did not try to break the glass. It behaved like a startled creature. That is reassuring. The encounter may have been nothing more than a wild animal meeting a terrified child and defensive house cat through a basement window. If that is true, the animal was probably just as frightened as I was. It may have been searching for food. It saw my cat, approached out of curiosity, and fled when a human appeared. The story sounds less frightening when described that way, but the physical reaction I had was real. There is a difference between understanding something later and experiencing it in the moment. At night, directly after waking, I did not see a confused raccoon. I saw a face that did not belong to any animal I knew. The mixture of features was what made it horrifying. A cat's general shape, an owl's wide, staring eyes, a raccoon's masked, almost human expression, combined into something much larger than my pet. I sometimes wonder whether the face looked different because it was pressed against the glass. An animal's nose, whiskers, and fur can flatten when it moves close enough. The reflection from inside may have doubled certain features. The eyes could have reflected light from the room, making them appear larger or brighter. The curved window surface might have widened the head. All those small distortions could create the image I remember. I wish I had turned on a light before opening the blinds. With better illumination, I might have identified it. I also wish I had looked outside the next morning for tracks. If the ground near the window was soft, footprints could have shown whether it was a cat, raccoon, a possum, or something else. At the time, I only wanted to avoid the window. By daylight, my mother's explanation had already reduced the event to a stray animal. No one investigated. There was no reason for an adult to treat it as anything more serious. No damage had been done. The animal had left. My cat was safe. The only lasting effect was my fear. I do not blame my mother for dismissing it. If a child told me an ugly creature appeared outside a basement window, I would also begin with the most ordinary explanation. A stray cat. A raccoon. A confused, half-awake perception. Those are all far more likely than an unknown creature. But being told what I must have seen does not change what the face looked like to me. It did not resemble any stray cat I had ever encountered. It looked almost assembled from several animals. The memory became one of those experiences that sits between certainty and doubt. I am certain my cat screamed. I am certain I opened the blinds. I am certain an animal or figure was directly outside. I am less certain that its appearance was exactly as I remember. Fear, darkness, and sleep may have altered the details. That uncertainty may be more disturbing than a clear answer. If I knew it was a raccoon, I could laugh at how frightened I became. If I knew it was a hallucination, I could accept that my mind briefly misfired. Instead, I have only the face. Sometimes when I think about it, I remember how close the glass was to my bed. If the window had been open, the creature might have entered. Basement windows are often small, but an animal twice the size of a cat could still try to climb through. I do not remember whether there was a screen or whether the window could be opened easily. Thankfully, the glass remained shut. The creature never touched me. It only looked in. That should make the story less frightening. It does not. Being watched while sleeping is a primal fear. We are most vulnerable in bed. We trust walls, doors, and windows to separate us from whatever moves outside. My cat's screams revealed that something had come close enough to challenge that feeling of safety. She saw it before I did. She knew it did not belong there. Her reaction pulled me awake and made me look. Perhaps she saved me from sleeping through the entire encounter. Or perhaps she created the fear by reacting aggressively to an ordinary animal. Both can be true. I have never seen the creature again. No similar animal appeared in the yard. There were no more faces against the glass. The event lasted only a few seconds and left no evidence. That makes it easy to explain away. It also makes it impossible to resolve. To this day, I do not open blinds at night. It does not matter where I am. Even when the window is several floors above the ground, I feel uncomfortable looking into darkness. Part of me expects to find something already staring back. I know windows reflect the room at night. I know a branch, animal, or shadow can look frightening when seen unexpectedly. I know the creature was probably a raccoon, opossum, stray cat, or some combination of poor lighting and a half-awake mind. Those explanations are rational. They are probably correct. But whenever I picture that basement room, I remember the sound first. My cat screaming and hissing behind the blinds. Then, I remember pulling them open. The creature was so close that its face seemed to fill the entire window. It stared at me with those wide, unnatural eyes. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, it ran into the darkness. I closed the blinds and never looked outside at night the same way again. If you've stayed with me this far, then these stories didn't simply pass the time. They stayed with you. Everything you heard tonight was real. Real people. Real moments. And in each one, something quietly slipped out of place. If you'd like more of the kind that don't let go so easily, subscribe to Crowvane Manor. There are more rooms left open and more stories waiting behind every door. I'm grateful you spent this part of your night here. Rest well, and I'll be waiting when you return.